This is a very important topic, and your masterclass, your badass masterclass,
Yeah.
talks about this. And I figured you could help lead us off on wiggling our toes.
Yeah, I like
But
that
not
you
literally.
picked that theme. I mean, literally, we can all wiggle our toes right now if you want. We can like count down and I'll do it together. That wouldn't be weird at all. Um, you're like
That's
the
step
look
one
on
in
your
the
face.
class.
You're like,
Yeah.
please let her be kidding.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I kind of teed the class up a little bit at the beginning, but my message and what I talk about and my speaking that I do and everything is pretty focused on like mental health and mental fortitude and grit and just how we see ourselves in the world and how when we can flip that a little bit, like just the possibilities open up, and it can, without changing any of our external circumstances, we can completely change what we're capable of. And so it's been so cool to do that for people as a speaker. But I had all these things I had learned during my whole journey through that in my career. And I really wanted to bring them into something that was more actionable, like storytelling, but still tools that anyone could implement in their lives that they could actually bring in, create new habits that would serve them well, and then go do these big things. And so that's where the Badass Masterclass came into play. And the whole thing is recognizing our negative inner talk tracks that we all have. I call it the inner critic. It's been called head trash by people. It's just those negative things that we get so used to hearing that we say to ourselves that they become just wrapped in with our identity. And the more that you talk to yourself in that way, the more it becomes just your norm and it becomes what you're comfortable with. And your brain actually, with how like neuroplasticity works, the more that you do it, the more your brain gets used to it. And then the more you do it. So it's like this revolving cycle where you kind of can fall into this spiral. And it can be very hard to read the label from the inside of the jar. Like it can be super hard to have perspective on it when you're in it. And
Yeah.
so I was in it when I was in Japan, and you've heard me tell that story on this show before. Um, like to the point of I was for sure depressed and should have sought help, but it just wasn't even a thing then. This was like 2012, 2013 timeframe. And I could not generate that perspective for myself. And so the course takes people through that. I call it the 30,000 foot view, which is just like zooming out, separating yourself from your negative inner voice so that when you start down that path, you recognize it and then you have the ability to choose something different. And then just identifying those stale scripts, which is what I call those lines we feed to ourselves all the time, but they're stale. They're not serving you. But it takes a lot of things that you all are very familiar with from your backgrounds that can be used outside of the cockpit, outside of aviation. There's some stuff in there about chair flying and just how powerful visualization can be. And I don't know about you, but I went to pilot training with 0 civilian time. And if I had not spent a lot of time chair flying, I would not have made it through the program. There's no way. Like creating that mental rehearsal is what allowed me to feel prepared enough to go do these flights with new concepts, gave me the confidence in the cockpit. And there's a whole bunch of areas that you can use that concept outside of aviation. And then I'll get into wiggle your toes because that's a fun one and you threw it up there. So I first heard of wiggling your toes when I was trying to learn to air refuel and I was just like sucking at it. Standard, you get into a PIO, so pilot induced oscillation, too high, too low, too much closure, return to stern, boom operator sends you back and your whole flight is there waiting on you. And you're just like, damn it. Like, this is embarrassing. I have to buy beer and everyone is watching me. And so an instructor told me, they're like, you're over gripping, you're like over stressed out, you're super tensed up. The stick and the viper really sensitive. Like that is causing this porpoise that you're getting into. So when you start to feel that, I want you to focus on your toes and your boots and wiggle your toes. And I was just like, this sounds dumb. But then the next flight, I went out and I literally did it. I was like approaching the boom and I was starting to get into those PIOs and I was like focusing on my toes and I'm wiggling them and I just relaxed. It like brought me out of like that hyper vigilant state. And I was like, that really worked well for me thinking back throughout my career. And so I talked to a neuroscientist about it. I was like, hey, this is the thing. What is that? And she was like, I love that because there's proven science behind why that works. And it's like our brain waves, our brain operates in these different states. It can be like super hyper vigilant if we're really focused, like if you're a surgeon performing surgery or a fighter pilot trying to air refuel, or you're kind of in that mode of like fight or flight, like a lot is happening. And then there's kind of like lower states all the way to being asleep or unconscious. And one state isn't necessarily better over another. What's important is that you have the flexibility to regulate to the correct state at the correct time. And so a lot of people with PTSD come home and they're like stuck in this hyper vigilant brainwave. And the more you spend time there, the more that becomes your norm. And those neurons like get, they're the ones that are used to those pathways and they get used more and more. And so that becomes just what you default to. And there's physical disruptors that you can use to bring you out of that state, like back into your body for a minute, where you can think a little bit more logically and you can choose how you're going to respond to something rather than reacting in a way you don't want to. And wiggle your toes is just one example. And so that's why it works. And I just thought this was super badass that there's actually science behind it. And so I put together this whole course that takes people through 6 weeks. It drops once per week, but it's self-paced. It's pre-recorded. And then there's a community that goes along with it. And so everyone is going to start at the same time. It's on sale till April 15th. And then April 18th, we're all starting together. So not only are these people working with me as I bring them through this framework of tools and like have them implement them in their lives each week, but they get to interact with each other. And so they get to hear like the aha moments that different people have. And I think it's just going to be a really neat way for those people to connect with each other. I am excited to see the impact because the most rewarding thing about what I do now is hearing people's success stories afterwards. And I get a lot of those just from like a 45-minute or a 1-hour keynote. And so to give them so much more in a format and at a price point that's just really accessible to most people, I'm just super excited about. So that was a long pitch. That's the Badass Masterclass. It's fun to say.
Yeah.
Do you have questions? I feel like I just went on.
Feel like a badass already. No, I mean, what you're talking about, I mean, I learned the wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes and UPT and the T-38 because that's what they would talk about to kind of calm down, flying fingertip.
Yep.
One thing that's interesting, you're talking about the self-talk. I've heard, maybe I haven't heard, I just made it up in my head, but you wouldn't talk to your best friend like that, right? You're talking to yourself and saying, you're never going to make it. It's never going to work out. The never, never, never. But think about the advice you would give a friend. You'd be a horrible friend if you did that. But why would you do that to yourself? Why would you? Yeah, but yet we're okay with telling ourselves that we're, you're a loser. You're never it's not going to work. I got into a point where I felt like it was bad luck if I did anything but thought the worst, right? Like if you think the worst, you can't be disappointed. And then if something okay happens, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's better versus what you talk about, this positive attitude of, it's actualization. I'm visualizing it, I'm making it my reality. And then the next thing is it's actually happening. I mean, that's why we chair fly, right? If you chair flew every mission going wrong, and you doing the wrong things, then you would think about the wrong things. It would just be in your head. We chair fly to do that. So I think that's really cool that you're doing that. We'll put the link in the description when this video becomes its own video, and then for the on-demand stuff there. But on the mental health topic, I think that's a great topic in general, is just because I haven't figured that out. I went through some stuff very similar in 2021 and then again in 2022 for vastly different reasons. But, you get into this death spiral of telling yourself that things are just bad. It's going to go worse. And that's what would get my, the cortisol up, all the physiological responses would come from the fact that your mind does not stop. And the only way I could break it was, breathing exercises, like you talked about, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, singing. If you sometimes you can break it just by, simple, singing a cool song to yourself. I mean, it just depended on what was going on, and eventually it goes away. And eventually there is life on that other side. So I tell people, when you're going through something bad, make sure you've got this support network. Like what you're talking about, where you can go to a friend or go to someone else. Use the resources available. Mental health counseling is always an option. Military family readiness, if you're in the military, military one source, 988. If you're thinking about hurting yourself, don't make a temporary problem permanent. But Gonky, what do you think, man?
Yeah, Mace, that's awesome. I mean, for sure, I'm my own worst enemy. I think any A-type personality is like that, right? We're always, it's like in a debrief. Like most of the time you spent just getting pummeled by all the mistakes you make, and that's kind of how that's kind of how I think sometimes. I don't look at the good things that I'm doing. It's like everything I'm doing is a failure. It seems like, anyways, right? So. And yeah, some of the breakout periods in my entire life has just literally been a mental shift, and that sometimes came from my parents, that sometimes came from friends, sometimes myself. So that's awesome that you're gonna be able to teach tools and techniques for people to to break that. That's your being your own worst enemy is tough.
For sure. And both of you mentioned it. And another portion of it is like finding your wingman and being intentional with those relationships to strengthen them and then show up for other people in that way as well. Because it'll be reciprocated if you do. And I think that we all have our people that we can rely on in our lives. But if you like take the time to actually be intentional with those relationships and what you want out of them and what you want to bring to them, it can just make them so much better. And I think you said something about like you like are creating your future, and I feel like I'm always so scared to get into like, especially when you say the word masterclass, to get into like the woo woo stuff where they're like, just sit here and imagine making $1 million a year. Now it's your reality. And
that doesn't work.
That is not what this is. This is
where is Margot Robbie?
Right.
Right.
How many times can I imagine this? Oh, sorry.
Any day now.
Yeah. I've imagined so many times.
Call it realistic optimism. Like, I want to be optimistic that I can go do the thing and that it's going to work out, but I want to be realistic in the amount of preparation and the hard work that I need to put in to make it happen. And when you kind of bring those two things together, it's pretty cool, the stuff you can go do.
Yeah. Doug, what do you have to add, man?
Mace, I don't know if you know this. My day job is a psychology professor. It sounds like you really did your homework here. There's a lot of solid stuff there. It's all science-based, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive restructuring. That's the stuff, man. That's the stuff that works. So.
I did not know that. That would have been cool for anyone to give me a heads up.
Yeah, don't be nervous.
Yesterday. No, sorry, we forget. I always think of him as my race car guy.
I appreciate that.
The thing you nailed the hardest that I really want to repeat is, well, you didn't nail that the hardest. It was all awesome. But the thing that hit me the hardest was it sounds stupid until you try it. Right. There's so much good stuff in mental health counseling and in mental, in therapy and you get this stuff out in front of people. That sounds stupid. Yeah, well, try it because it works. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I looked up the class. I might even enroll just to see what happens. Nice. That's great. That's
first customer or 45th.
Well, it's so cool to see somebody who's got a platform use it for something like that, and what you finished up with. Not doing the woo. This is real stuff. There's so much crap out there.
There is, and I've had my own moments of imposter syndrome, right, as I do this course, because I would never want to take the platform that I've built and the amazing audience that has been so loyal to me as I left the Air Force and gone on to do what I do now, and just cash that all in on a masterclass to make some money, right? On crystals. If you sign up for level 2, I'll send you a autographed rose quartz in the mail.
I think I can buy those on eBay.
There are no crystals.
I love it.
Yeah, so I legitimately want it to be something that helps people. So
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Mace.